Alright, hello, and welcome to Open Education Analytics. My name is Chad, and today I'll be giving you an overview of analytics solutions in this space. I'm going to touch on quite a few topics, so a brief outline of what we'll be after. With each of these, we won't do a lot. Mostly, I'll give an overview of all of the major pieces. So I'll start with the Synapse Workspace. I'll give a tour of all the major parts from an analytics point of view. I'll show you how to access and query data yourself, connect to Power BI, and even load and do analytics within Synapse Notebooks. I'll give a quick peek into machine learning and machine learning studio within Azure as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The best way to reach Synapse is just through this URL, right? So web.azuresynapse.net. You'll receive a login page, and then this is the major landing page right here, right? So I'll list the workspace that I'm currently operating in. And Synapse basically is a one-stop shop for all of your Azure resources, right? So it gives you a way to bring everything together from the data science point of view, right? So it's used for ingesting data, loading it either through pipelines or manually. You can explore data within Synapse via notebooks as well as Power BI. You can also analyze it and run models on it as well. I recommend if you have time, there's a lot of very good documentation here. So clicking on the Learn tab. And if you scroll down, you can see lots of other resources as well, including community resources, right? So I'll let you have a look. The major pieces are over on this left-hand side menu, right? So the home screen is where we are. We can access our data here. We can write notebooks or Sql scripts in the development tab. We can build our own pipelines and monitor anything in our workflow that we need. And there's a bunch of settings we can look at as well. For us, I'm going to start with the data, right? So the data sources that are connected to this workspace. I can see right away within the workspace, I have 11 databases available, right? So if I click this open, I'll see a mixture of databases that I have available. Some I might have access to, some I might not, depending on my permissions. There's two major types. One is a SQL pool, which you have to start up and use, mostly by querying via SQL, but other ways as well. There's also a series of Spark pools, right? And Spark is more for larger data, loading the data and playing with it in memory, right? Rather than actually putting it into a physical location. I'll dive into these shortly, but you can also see the storage locations in Azure if you click the link spaces, and I can see that there's a data lake that my SQL pools are pointing to. And if I have access, I can actually look into the structure of this lake myself. But let's go back to our workspace data sources. I'm going to pick on one of these Spark pools. And for me, Spark pools are the major tool that I'll use because they're mostly built for doing things with large data in memory, so I don't need to dedicate any resources to run them. I can see right here there's a list of tables within my Spark pool, right? So these are, maybe you have some that are similar, maybe yours are a bit different. I'm going to pick on one to start. So there's a person table, and I can view the columns in that table. So it looks like I have an ID column, which is a string. I have a first name, a middle name, a last name, and a bunch of other information about people in my database. For me, people are going to be either students or teachers in our education system. When I have a table, a nice feature is you can actually click this drop-down menu, and I can load a new SQL script that actually shows me what the data looks like, right? So this will give me a peek of the top 100 rows, and it's using just regular SQL, and it's connecting to the built-in serverless SQL pool. And if I run this, once the query has executed, I should see the top few lines of my data. And I can even customize these SQL queries using whatever query that I want to build to explore my data. So this is a very fast way to get a feeling for what's in your database. I can see I have a bunch of student IDs, but for me, I'm looking at anonymized data, so I don't know students' names. But I have a bunch of other information, like an external ID, when they were created, if they're an active student or teacher, and some other details as well. So that's pretty slick, right? So super fast, very easy to sort of see things. I could also, if I feel like from here, load these into a notebook, and I'll show you some details of that in a second. I could also even execute machine learning on these tables if I feel like it, and I'll show you that a bit more in a moment. So that's a peek into the data tab. and there's a lot more to explore, but I'll resist for now. Over here on the left-hand side, again, I'm going to go to the Develop tab to sort of see where can I start diving a little bit deeper into some of the details, right? So if I go to this Develop tab, I can see there's three main pieces, right? So there's a storage location for SQL Scripts, so you can actually see the one I just created is here. And if I wanted to, I could change its name and actually save it, right? So here I could have a, let's call it demo script. And if I want to save it for later, that's pretty easy to do, right? I really just need to publish it to my workspace. So that's stored, and I can see there's a lot of other ones that are there from other users, or maybe I created myself. Spaces with a bit more functionality are notebooks, right? So a Synapse Notebook is a lot like a Python notebook. I'm going to load up one that was used for some machine learning purposes in the past. And this is saved, right? So any user can access this and clone it and run their own analysis on it if they feel like it. I won't run the script, but I'm mostly going to show what it looks like and point out a few different features from the Synapse Workspace point of view. All right, so that loaded. Let's maybe hide this. And you can see that Synapse Notebooks are really a combination of Markdown language, right? So this is basically like a Word document where I can actually make notes and I can give a table of contents if I feel like it. I can give section headers like we have here. And if you want to edit them, they're pretty easy. You just double click and you can change it as you feel like, right? But then I can also see that there's coding blocks here, right? So this one right here is a coding block and it's written in the language PySpark, which is really a combination of Python and Spark. So this is a bunch of Python commands that load in libraries as I want. I could go ahead and run this and execute it, and it'll run it on this Spark pool that I have here available, right? So that's super easy to use. I can save these and I can archive them as I feel like it, right? So notebooks are really a pretty go-to way for doing analytics if you're comfortable with things like Python. If you're more comfortable with other languages, you can actually change this notebook to be a Scala notebook, or it could be in C#, or you can do Spark SQL. And you actually don't have to choose. If you want most of it to be in Python, but I want some of it to be in Scala, I could just make an individual coding block in that one language there. Let's go ahead and go back though. I can also see in this space there's SQL scripts, there's notebooks, but there's even Power BI dashboards that are located here, right? So if you have a Power BI workspace created, you can actually store Power BI data sets and dashboards here. And if you click one, so here I'll click this bottom one here, it'll actually load that dashboard in the Synapse Workspace, and I can even edit it and do all sorts of different things like you would usually do in Power BI. The functionality here is a bit limited, right? So it's not as much as you might see in a Power BI desktop, for example. But you can see all the usual things, like you can create visualizations over here, you can see your tables that it's connected to, and these are really the same Spark tables that we saw before, right? So my person table is right here. And I could even create tabs. There's a lot of different options. But it is a bit more limited than Power BI Desktop, right? So one thing to wonder is, can I use just regular Power BI Desktop here rather than doing it in the browser? So that is certainly an option. So I have a demo dashboard loaded. This is actually the same dashboard. I just downloaded it and loaded it into my Power BI desktop. Once I log in using my credentials for the Synapse Workspace, I can access all those tables and everything just like I would have done before, right? So this one just shows an overview of the school district that I'm looking at for a number of schools and some data about digital engagement compared to achievement, right? If I click the data model, you can actually see all of the tables that we had in that Spark pool that I showed you before, and they're all connected using a bunch of relational connections, right? So there's a lot of details here, but that same data I can query directly from Power BI Desktop. Then when I publish any changes that I make, those changes will get refreshed here, right, in the Synapse Workspace. So that's super handy. One question you might have is, how do I start a brand new Power BI dashboard if I want to? You have two options. One is you can go straight from here and actually create a new Power BI dashboard yourself just via this drop-down menu, right? So you can hit plus, and plus will let you create a new report from scratch, right? It's a little bit clumsy doing this in the browser, but if you're doing something simple, I think that's the best way to go. You can also do this though via Power BI, right? So here I have just a new dashboard up and running, just like I would on my Power BI desktop. I can import this data from a SQL server, and what this will do is it'll give me a way to connect to my Synapse Workspace, right? So it'll ask me for a server endpoint. It turns out that all of these SQL pools that we had in Synapse are actually running from the same SQL Server endpoint, right? So I'll show you very quickly how to find that. If you go to your Azure portal, so portal.azure.com, this is a location of all of your Azure resources, right, in your Azure account. The one I'm going to click on is the Synapse Workspace, which I see here because I just used it, but I can also find it under all resources. So if I click that, there's a lot of details that you see, right? So it's pretty overwhelming at first, but I encourage you to look at them, right? So I think it's worthwhile. But the one I'm interested in is right here. So the dedicated SQL endpoint that I can use right here, right? And you could choose one of the two, right? So this endpoint or the on-demand endpoint. I'm going to use the serverless SQL endpoint right here. Okay, so if I hit copy to clipboard, I can actually use that exact same one here. And if I know the name of my database, I could type that in, right? So back in Synapse, say I want to choose this database here, I could type in that name. So that one was anonymized edu data lake. And I'll use direct query so that I don't pull all that data in locally, right? So I'll just query over it. So I won't go through the steps, but you can click OK here. You have to be logged into your account. And once you do so, it'll give you a list of tables that you can choose from this same list that we see here. So maybe you just want the person table and the activity table or whatever you're chasing. Okay. All right, so that's a very quick way to get into Power BI. You can publish back to the workspace. One more piece I want to show for this video, just to give you a feeling of what we'll see in the future. If I go back to any table I want, there's an option here where you can run machine learning on that table. So say you have a table that you want to build a model off of, you can enrich this table with a brand new model, and this will go through a bunch of a few windows to get that experiment set up. And in future videos, I'll give you the details of this. So here I'm just giving the short version. But that'll connect to what's called Azure Machine Learning Studio, right? So within Synapse, you can connect to this, and you actually don't have to leave Synapse at all if you don't feel like it. But in this studio, you can see it looks a lot like the Synapse Workspace. There's a lot of things I can do. I can build notebooks, but it's really built around everything machine learning. So automated ML, drag and drop machine learning designer. I can run experiments. I can manage models and all sorts of different things. So in an upcoming video, we'll dive into this one here. All right, so that's my very brief interview or overview of everything Synapse, right? So hopefully it seems like there's a lot that we can do. A quick recap of everything that we just saw, right? So here. And I'll give a little bit more details to everything, right? So we looked through the Synapse Workspace tour. The main idea here is that you get to access everything Azure, all of your resources in one place, rather than having to hop around to many different locations. For your data, you can access it directly in the workspace and query it using either SQL or Spark pools. And you can use this to explore your data, right? Those same pools connect to Power BI. You can do this either in the workspace or via a desktop app. And if you want to build things a little bit more sophisticated, you can use Synapse Notebooks. Lots of languages are supported, but there's a lot of flexibility in those notebooks. Even more so, you can go further with machine learning in ML Studio. You can manage models and workflows. Everything here I'm going to show more details of in subsequent videos, right? So I hope to see you there. All right, that's everything.